You ready?
Yeah, but that's
No, but it's the way the stage is set up. It's an oval, so that's the kind of
Me and Tucker decided.
it's all different.
Greg, I can give you a chair over there if you want one. You want to sit over there? You're not. It's all good. All good.
Well, thank you. Until I need to take off my mask so that you can hear me. Thank you all for being here this evening. We appreciate your time and your interest in our work with West Broad. I want to begin by saying that this discussion tonight is to present the information that we have found and concluded through our work as a district operations team. If you all recall, we had this conversation a few months back, and we were asked to really consider the position that the board had taken, not the board, please forgive me, the position that our operations team, our SPLOST department specifically had taken regarding next steps for West Broad. At that point, we did reach out to the federal government, the Office of Early Head Start, because as you know, the initial recommendation was that we use the facility to house 16 Early Head Start classrooms that we had received in the Early Head Start expansion grant. Based on community input, Ms. Higginbotham, there she is, and I did meet with the federal grant holders and request that they extend the timeline for us past the initial date we had been given so that we would be able to further explore what are our options in terms of maintaining the property at West Broad. Based on that, they agreed to allow us to do that. We went back, Mr. Gilbert met with our current architects. We also engaged services of another historic preservation architect, Ms. Jacqueline Bass, to help us with this work and to see what our options were. As Tommy Valentine said to me, it's a difference in something being difficult and something being impossible. And I heard that and respected that, and I agreed with that. And what I wanted us to be able to do was to ensure that whatever recommendation we made had exhausted all possible, I don't want to say all possible, all reasonable expectations based on what we could do and still provide support for our early learning department. And that is where we are today. I do want to say that this is not about a personal opinion of Sir Nolan Thomas. This is not about my personal value of the West Broad property. As most of you know, I am a native Athenian. I value the history of Athens. I particularly value the African American history and heritage of Athens. As superintendent, I also have an obligation to take the best information that I have and make a recommendation based on that. This decision is not personal. The decision that the board will choose to make after my recommendation tomorrow and when they vote next week will not be taken personally. What we're asking is that we move forward in one way or another, whether that is to move forward with early learning at the West Broad property based on their vote, or whether the decision is not to move forward because the desire is to do something different in terms of maintaining that property in its entirety. So that's where we are. That's the angle from which I will share the information with you this evening. And we will do this presentation and then have about 15 minutes or so at the end for any questions. And then tomorrow night, I will make my official recommendation. And next week, the board will then have an opportunity to vote. And then we will know as a community what our next steps are. With that, beginning here, you will see that these are the site and potentials for a 2-building site and the options for a 3-building site. If you look with this 2-building site, it would be the minor street space maintained. Here we would have, we would have a new building, that you all have heard us speak about, and then here we would have an outdoor classroom area and play areas here at the top and play areas at the bottom. If we go with the 3-building site plan, we would maintain Minor Street, and we would have 7 classrooms there. We would have the Campbell Lane area, and in that we would have a media center. I'm sorry about that. Places at once. We would have a media center, an activity center, and heritage room, and then we would have the new building. Over here with the 2-building, it would be 4 actual classrooms. The media center, activity, and heritage rooms would be there. And I'll talk a little more about the heritage rooms in a little while when we get to some of the options. In this design, the new building is larger because we have more room here. In the open green space area here, we would have to reduce the size somewhat of the new building so that we could accommodate the green space and the Campbell Lane. So with the 2-building and 3-building comparison, I'll be honest, I don't like the way this looks because it looks like we're making this heavy on the 2-building and saying, oh, there's nothing good about the 3-building, because that's not the case. There are some positives with us keeping all 3 buildings. The biggest thing with keeping all 3 buildings, well, having 3 buildings, is that we maintain Minor Street and Campbell Street. So the biggest gain is about the historical preservation value and the value to the African American community of 2 of those buildings being able to stay on that property and be utilized. So that is the largest gain here. Did I hear that? I feel like Urkel. Dr. Thompson told me I had those hours. She just told me I have laser hours. So, go back, go forward, George. Okay, thank you. So, it is not that we're trying to say, well, look here, you can see that this does more, and look here, and this does less, because it's not about that. It really is about where you place your value. If it is about having and maintaining that historical space, then that, even if it's not showing in terms of list, is the greater value to you as an individual. In terms of operations, the benefit for us, but that's okay. On the 2-building plan, we would have students and staff located in 2 spaces on the same level. There would be 1 connector hall connecting those buildings from the existing Minor Street and the new building we're adding. It would be easier for security and access, but those are things we can work past. We'll be honest, those are things we can work past. All those classrooms would be built to CCSD and DOE standards, whereas if we went to the 3, we're gonna have to reduce the size of that third new building, so that would reduce the size somewhat of the classrooms in Minor Street. Because we'll have to put more classrooms there, if that makes sense. So by doing that, some of those classrooms would only be able to be used for infants, is that right, Ms. Higginbotham? Because the size requirements don't match for the older kids. But those are things we can make work. The daily operations are more efficient and effective in 2 buildings. From the outdoor, if we have 2 buildings, we do have 2 larger play areas for our children. We have an outdoor classroom area that I showed you earlier. We have more effective. Now, I won't say we don't have fire truck and trash access, but we will have more effective fire and trash access. What the engineers told us is that the turn radius, if we go to the 3 classrooms, will make it difficult for a fire truck to turn around. Am I saying that a fire truck can't get in? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the fire truck will come in and they will have to back out because they can't make that turn radius. The same thing is for truck access, and also we will have some issues with buses. Someone did say, but your kids aren't old enough to ride buses. But if I'm correct, when we have evening programs, when parents come in, we do offer transportation for some of our evening parenting classes. So buses will have some difficulty making the turn radius if we have the 3 buildings there. If we look over here, when we talk about the 3 buildings, then same thing that I just said. So some of the classrooms will be below the size that we generally like for them to be, but we can work through that. The biggest concern is that, one, is food will have to be served in classrooms, so our nutrition staff will have to deliver food between 3 buildings utilizing the ramp every day. And the biggest concern that we have identified in talking to Ms. Higginbotham and Mr. Gilbert is the ramp that our staff will have to go up and down to get to different areas. So Ms. Higginbotham, if you would come up, and we're not doing this to be dramatic, but if you're like me, I'm a visual learner. And so to see what that looks like, so we will have a 100-foot connector ramp. And Troy, if you could go next or forward, whichever you think is better, to show what that ramp looks like. So there's the ramp. Try to see if this works. Okay, there we go, right here. So we have to have that closed in for safety. So it looks like part of a building, but this is actually a 1,000-foot ramp. I'm sorry, I'm really using on that. A 100-foot ramp with a 5-foot elevator. And so this is closed in with windows because of the age of the children. We want that area to be secure. We want that area to be heated and able to be cool. However, when we have classrooms that are here, and we have our activity area here, when our staff have to go back and forth between this building and this building to utilize the activity room, they will have to go up and down this ramp every day. Because of the age of our children, they are in strollers. So our staff will have to push the children in a 4-person stroller every time they have to go from one building to another up a 5-foot incline. And so when they're going up and down, this is what we're asking the staff to do. Then we have the safety evacuation cribs. Is that what they're called? I'm learning so much about early learning. And so if there are safety issues, then they have to take the kids in these cribs to go up and or down that ramp. Another area that we had to consider in making the decision is the gross motor skills of children who are ages 1 and 2 years old. So even if the children are old enough to walk in, the gross motor of going up and down the ramp every day, not impossible, it's a challenge. So when we're looking at the ask of our early Head Start staff, the challenges of transporting the children throughout the day, daily, multiple times a day, does involve this type of equipment. And I wanted you just to see that because in talking with Ms. Higginbotham, she has been very open, very flexible, and said, we will do whatever we're asked to do. We can make it work. Is it convenient? Is it a challenge? Is it an ask on our staff? Yes. If we're told, well, we need to make this work, we can do it, but people need to just understand that this is what will be required daily each time the staff has to go from their regular classroom back into the activity space. So we just wanted you to see that. So when we talk about the negatives, that's really what we're talking about here. You know, and then things about energy efficiency, the ceilings are lower. Those are things you work through. But the bigger ask for us is what we are requiring of the staff every day. Outdoors, again, it talks about security, the pad drop-off area. So when you look at the map, I'm sorry, Troy, I just had to go back and forth. With this design, we have a driveway here, and they will loop around and they can come out here, because we would have space to do that. With the other design, we won't have space for an exit here. So families will come in here, and they'll go around and drop off, and then they'll come back through here, which unfortunately is the parking area. And so as cars are coming in, coming out, the parents want to park and walk their kids in. That will have to happen here, while we also have cars driving around here. So when we talk about safety, it just creates a barrier as families are having to pull in, pull out, and drive through, because we won't have that second exit. Yes, sir, I am. Okay, come back one more time so we can see the play area. So those are the play areas. So there will be an outdoor classroom here, there will be a play area here, and then the other play areas up in here, is that right? Right up in that little area. Okay. So that, again, that's the park and drive without the second entrance or exit there. When we look at project costs, and that is what I asked the team to make that the last criteria we looked at, because we can't put a value on history. We can't put a monetary dollar amount on history and on heritage. So the last thing we did look at was the cost. The additional cost would be about $3.6 million for us to add the Campbell Street building into this design. So that's to be considered. Some people have asked where would that cost come from. We've had conversations regarding that. I've spoken to some of our board members, I've spoken to community members. There may be options for looking at some of our federal funds. Right now, our initial would be that we would have to pull it from existing SPLOST dollars. We don't want to create a us against them, even though it's all us. But right now, it would have to come from existing SPLOST, and that is money that had been designated to support the Cedar Shoals Athletic Field House. So if we chose at this moment, without any guarantees of other funds, there may be other fund options out there, but the SPLOST funds that we know we have available are the funds that are currently designated for the field house at Cedar. So that would move that project to SPLOST 6. Is that right, Mr. Gilbert? So if we, today, based on the money we know we have, to add this in, we would have to pull it from that current project. And I'm not at all trying to make this, you can have West Broad or you can have Cedar Shoals. It's just the reality of, if we look at the money we have in the bank at this moment, it's kind of like at home, right? So I might get an extra check, I might get a loan from somewhere, but the money we know we currently have, that we know we can pull from, would would be the funds that are currently designated to begin the field house work at Cedar. If we were to go with the two building design, we have reached out already to Mrs. Elizabeth Platt, who's here today, who did an amazing job with our heritage room in this building. We reached out and asked her to start talking to different community members about artifacts and pieces of history that they have, because we do want to have a heritage room in that facility. In addition, we have reached out to Ms. Jacqueline Bass, the historic preservation architect, who has done work on wayfinding, symbolic signage, having markers there. So we would have historical markers to identify the history of Minor Street, the history of the West Broad Street campus in its entirety, and the history of the Campbell Lane building. One of the things I've had conversations a lot in the last few months because of the West Broad discussion, and I was talking to someone, I think about East Broad, or East Athens School, and they were saying how there's nothing there to even show that there was ever a school there. There's nothing that honors the history and heritage of what that place was and what it meant to the African American community. That is something that we refuse to allow to happen, and we are very committed to making sure that we honor that history as much as we physically can by having pieces of history there, as well as by having these wayfinding historical markers and signage. And so history and photos of teachers, those are the kinds of things that Mrs. Platt has been collecting. I'm fine. Display cases like we have here, artifacts, memorabilia would be displayed. These are just examples of what some of the wayfinding plaques look like in different places. Sometimes it'll show what the actual design of the building was, pictures from that time. This one has like a brief history of the space. So we have a lot of different options regarding what we could do in terms of markers and ways to make sure that our children and community will always know what that property stood for and meant for the African American community in Athens, Clark County. These are just some other pictures of spaces of what's been done in other locations to honor the heritage. So that really concludes kind of our findings, what we feel that the challenges will be, and those really are more around the day-to-day operations for early learning, for early Head Start, and being able to support those teachers in doing their work with the kids in the safest and most efficient way possible. Okay, if you want to go ahead and play that, and I will move out of the way.
This is starting on Paris Street. Turn that on the wall.
Troy, can you do the narrator?
No, it's just we want to run, this would be the backside of the new building. There's a play area between the two buildings. There's a Minor Street building
over it, but does anyone have questions? Yes, Mr. Sheets.
My first question, with all that renovation going to the primary building on Minor Street, will that building lose its historical significance with all that new renovation?
Okay, so the question, I'm supposed to get in the mic. The question was, with all the renovation of the Minor Street property, how much will be lost in terms of historical value and significance? The parts I can answer, and then I'll turn it over to them, is I do know in working with the historic preservationists, parts of what was being done was what Mr. Bassett just mentioned, like the windows having the same look. There was discussion around bricks, doorways having the same look, and bringing and keeping as much of that look from the original building, but I will allow Mr. Gilbert to speak.
John, please.
Yes, our intent for the Minor Street building is to preserve as much of the exterior as we can. I don't know if you've been down there and walked the site recently, but there's vinyl siding on the soffits and some of the fascia that will be restored aesthetically to look as the original building was. Windows would go back with, I believe it's a 12/12 divided light look. We would put modern windows in, but the divided light look would be comparable to the windows that were there. So everything on the exterior, 3-tab asphalt shingles would go back just like they are. It would be probably a higher grade 30-year shingle versus what was available back then. So there's not really, we're going to keep the columns as they are and refurbish them and bring them back. The challenge that we have is that any surface that's down there has been painted with lead. So we have to remove that and abate the lead paint on those surfaces because we're going to have children in that facility.
I understand all that you just said, but my concern is y'all forgive me for my skepticism and cynicism. I'll make this real brief, folks. Forgive me for my cynicism and skepticism. I'll make this real brief. I'm very suspicious of powers that be. If this building loses its historical significance, then it loses its historical designation. And further down the road, a few years, maybe 10, 20, I don't know, but the way things are changing in Clark County, I could easily see that building eventually being demolished because it no longer has its historical significance because of all the modern day conveniences made. Now, I could be wrong on my own, please correct me, but I have a very suspicious mind.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're putting an early learning program in there that has a grant for the next 5 years, and is a viable program in that facility. I mean, that facility can be here for the next 50 years. So any of the upgrades or modifications that we're doing to that structure are going to enhance it, and it'll be around for the next 50 years. And the commitment that we've pledged to do to the campus and the site is to keep it a viable educational site for the district and for the community.
And I do think, I get your point. Am I allowed to? Sorry. I get your point, Mr. Sheets, and so what I hear you saying is though, once we make some of those, or many of those upgrades and changes, does that then change the status and the historical protection of the property? And that's a very good question, and that's something that then the board will have to consider in order to house the early learning center there. Those changes will have to be made because we have building code, requirements for any space that houses children. So we would have to make some substantial and significant updates to it that would change what it's like. But, so then that's something that as the board considers their vote that has to be taken into account is, are we willing to lose that historical integrity, I think is kind of what you're speaking of that property, or do we want to maintain that so that it can maintain its historical significance and its place on the registry? So in order to have the early learning, we are going to have to make those upgrades. So then the discussion for the board will be, what is that risk in terms of, do we then take a risk regarding what happens to that property down the road because it now may not have the same protections. Did I capture what you were saying? Because I've been around you all my life. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, I speak pretty loud. Good evening, everybody. Is it nowhere in between? Does it have to be that extreme? I'm from Washington DC, lived in Philadelphia, I've seen many buildings, hundreds of years old, that get used years later in this modern time, and they're still able to be used now and keep the historical value. So if we did any, research outside of our space to see how that could be done, maybe we could look at doing that. You think of, some of our oldest cities that we have with, buildings that's as old as this time that we built it.
Right. So I think part of what Mr. Sheets is saying, yes, and, or yes, but, right? So, yes, we can, and buildings have been and are maintained all the time. I think the bigger question that he's asking is, what do those changes do? So we can maintain a lot of the historical integrity of the space, and we will do that with the windows and with things on the ceilings and with doors. But does that change how some of the national registries view the property? And I think that's more of what you're asking is, does the property then lose some of its protections because of some of those changes and updates that are there? Yes, sir.
That lady first.
Thank you. Is the historic preservationist here and able to give insight to some of these questions and give us a breakdown of?
Ms. Bass is here.
Yes.
And she is the expert, so I will move from the mic and you can answer those questions for us.
So, can you hear me? Okay, so the building, changes that we're doing, I was tasked to look at all the historic characteristics of the Minor Street building and then to some extent on the Campbell Lane building. The features that we're saving, to the greatest extent, they've selected most of the things that I've recommended. There are some things that are still, I think, up for design consideration based on, whether they can be retained or not due to the lead paint issues. Things like windows, the original windows are gone. So the new windows being brought in are representing the historic windows based on documentation that we have. Unfortunately, because they're gone, they have to be replaced, but they, to the greatest extent, will match what we have documentation for. The floor plan, for the most part, the main corridors will remain the same. So the flow in the original layout reflects it. Some of the interior classroom dividers need to change just to accommodate the new programming. So that's one consideration. But overall, the building will reflect the original design. So, and maintain a lot of the original fabric and therefore the integrity. Beyond that, the site is changing. So that's one of the issues where it may be a little tricky with regard to designation. So it just really will depend on ultimately the final decisions that are made.
Can I follow up question? And I'm sorry, sir. Would you be able to kind of walk us through exactly what the $4 million would be, or the cost to have the pre-planned building? What we would be spending that money on?
Unfortunately, I don't know that. I haven't seen the cost estimate, so I don't know what went into consideration for it. I'm not sure. There were some recommendations that I made on the Campbell Lane building after looking at different considerations that are needed with regard to bringing it up to code for windowing and also, of course, for the new uses. But again, because of programming, that wasn't something I was asked to look at. It was really from a historic perspective, so I gave recommendations. But I never saw.
Do we have her recommendations? Has the board been provided with her recommendations?
Yes.
Could somebody please send that to me again? I think I missed it.
I have.
You have it? Oh, so
You said the board has been given?
Yeah, there's two letters. There's a letter on Minor Street and one on Campbell Street as well.
Well, could I,
Yeah, we can get those.
yeah, because I think 3 board members are saying we haven't seen it, so. Thank you. I think you can
So Ms. Bass, what you're saying too then, so the historic registry part would depend, would it depend on what the kind of the end product of that layout of the campus itself?
Yeah, because when they look at significance and they look at a whole different battery of things going into a nomination. I'm assuming we're discussing the national.
Right, yes, ma'am.
And so when they look at that, they consider, of course, the integrity of the building, but a feeling and association. And so if the area, the context in which the original building, the Minor Street building, if it's changed so much, it's loses feeling and association, that can have an effect on whether or not it's considered still to meet the standards.
And that could happen potentially even if all 3 buildings were, I mean, if the Campbell and Minor were
Well,
kept or with.
If Campbell and Minor, it's just a statement. That increases the historic integrity because more of the, what was in existence by the time Campbell Lane was built in the 50s.
Okay, I'm sure someone was wondering what's next. Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Benny Tillman Jr. This is my wife, Suzanne Burrow. We live at 265 Paris Street, which would be on the north side of the development. So, what I'm probably going to take this in a different direction. My first concern is, obviously, with construction, there's a lot of traffic in and out of the neighborhood, trucks, etc., which I'm all for the progress. So our streets already have not been resurfaced in, I don't remember when. So if all this construction stuff takes place, is there any guarantee, is there any allowance or anything to get these streets repaved? Because they're gonna be in worse shape from all this heavy equipment. So can that be a consideration?
That would be a request to Athens, Clark County, for us to go to them, because we don't maintain the streets. We'll do new curb cuts and sidewalks around us. We are working with their design consultant on the roundabout out of West Broad. There's a roundabout we're working on. But as far as the actual street surface paving, that would be discussion we would need to have with roads and drainage.
Would you have that discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We have it on. I don't control Athens, the
Okay,
county.
this is my second part. This is probably gonna be a little far out there, but I'm gonna have to put it out there anyway. I know the technology is gonna be amazing with the structure you guys are building. Parish, my house has been, where our family's been at this same plot for, since 1935. Yeah, so, and we're elderly people too, I wanna throw that out there, okay?
We couldn't tell.
So, my question comes to this, is there, while you guys are putting the Wi-Fi in and the stuff for the new building, can us elderly people at least get access to Wi-Fi in our houses? Is that not possible? That's not possible, is it?
I didn't say that, I just don't know how that works. Now I gotta look at the technology, man.
Well, I'm just saying,
To answer that question.
and the only reason I bring that up is, well, I'm not gonna turn this into a forum. We're on set incomes as it is, the majority of us in this neighborhood. I can probably afford to get the laptop, but with the cable bill we have now, and then you go and add the Wi-Fi and stuff to it, I couldn't even afford it. So I'm just saying, there can't be that many, well, there are a lot of elderly people in this corridor that you're talking about. I'm just saying, could we get the Wi-Fi or something to help us?
That is a very good question.
I'm doing so.
And someone is taking notes, Tom has that caption. She has it, and that is a good question, about what the, and I don't know legally
Yeah.
what we're able to do in terms of people's homes, but then I do know that we've had options in the past about towers and things like that where our students are able to access because of their location and proximity to a school. So those would be the lines of kind of what that conversation would look like, and we will make sure we have that conversation to find out.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, and that's an excellent question, because when you look at the give and take and the ask of the community, then when we
That's
talk
all.
about mutual benefit.
Exactly.
And being good neighbors. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, this way.
I'm sorry.
Okay, excuse me. I'm Shirley Tillman, and I have lived in the area all my life. And my question is, I know that it's for the learning, for the kids. I want to add, can you upgrade, tell us how it gonna affect the community, like training in those class areas, in that first on Manor Street? I would like to upgrade, if there will be, how many classrooms that will be for our community, that we can learn something. Instead of, I think they said we can come up here, but our main goal is want to go to West Broad and have some classes there. So I would like to know some information where we stand as a community, as for us to learn some things too.
Yes, ma'am. And I feel like I know you, because we've been talking to you a lot this week. So it's nice to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Yes, so definitely, we will have classroom spaces available, meeting spaces available, the activity room. The only caveat to that is that those spaces can only be used after children are out of the building. So based on grant requirements and student safety, we can't offer classes during the day, but as part of us being a community schools model, our goal is to open up our buildings for community usage so that people can come in and take computer classes or do job search classes, financial literacy courses, programs that our community needs to help improve the community as a whole. Because as our communities go, so go our schools. And so we want to be able to pour into the community as a whole, because that does help what happens with our children. So yes, we will be able to have spaces available for that type of use. It will just have to be once those kids are out of school in the afternoon. And I know we have classrooms, but the bigger areas that would be viable would be that activity space and that media center space.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, my name's Chris Morales. I was curious about there was some discussion about the ramp. What immediately popped in my mind was at Chase Street, where my kids go, there is a ramp that connects the historic building to the new construction. And I know Clark Central also has at least one ramp that I remember going up recently. So I think it's interesting that there seems to be a bit of a discussion about the ramp. It wouldn't set a precedent. I also found interesting, compared to the outdoor learning area that was closer to Broad Street, I know I've been out there with the market garden to buy things, and you could hear the cars making the noises as they hit the curves as they drive past, because there's 4 lanes there. It's very loud, it's very distracting, and so I thought that was an interesting placement in the 2-building plan that wouldn't exist in the 3-building plan.
So I think it would still exist in the 3-building, it's just smaller, is that right? So the larger playground area is is on Campbell Lane, that's the larger area, and the outdoor classroom is there. So in both of them, there is a play area where you're referencing, but the larger,
Main playground on the 3-building is the one she's talking about. On the 2-story, the main playground is farther off. If you look at, Broad is the top, so this is the main playground on the 2-story, on the 2 building. The main playground is at the top, where I guess that's front on the 3 building. It's up there, the green that you see at the top.
Okay, I was thinking garage is along the left.
yes, here's the 2 pointers. And to answer your question regarding why the ramp is an issue, where the back ramps in other places, the difference is those children are able to walk. And these kids have to be pushed in strollers. So that's the difference. So it's just the ask of staff when you have a 6 to 10 or 11-year-old, or in the case of Clark Central, you have 14 to 18, 19-year-olds. In this case, you have 3-month-old, because this is early learning, so these are babies. So that's the difference. While the ramp is a bigger issue on this property, is because you have infants, because it is an early Head Start program versus a high school program.
And the length of it.
And the length of the ramp. But the bigger thing is that the load for the staff having to wheel the children because they can't walk. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them can't walk, because this is about infants up to what, age 3?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Dr. Thomas. My name is Jennifer Lewis, and I have a question, a follow-up question about the ramp. Given the picture behind you for the 3-building site plan, there are connectors between the new building and the Minor Street building that includes a covered corridor, and there's also one that leads south down to the Campbell Lane building. In the presentation, you said that that the new building and the Minor Street building will be on equal levels. And so the ramp discussion is about the ramp that goes from the connector between the new building and Minor Street down to Campbell Lane.
Yes.
If the floor plan of the Minor Street building is going to be maintained somewhat in its original configuration, which is a center hall with classrooms on either side, why is the Minor Street building not used as a connector to bring children to the Campbell Lane building versus building a new connecting ramp?
This building, Minor Street building, right here, we're actually bringing the property down. We're cutting down about 4 or 5 feet, bringing the property down. The Minor Street and this building will still be 5 feet above this building. Even after you bring that property down, make those 2 buildings level, you still come down again. The stairs, when you come out the back of this building, it's about 6 feet straight down. That's downstairs. So there's no way to put all 3 buildings on the same level. It's just, that's not possible.
Gotcha, so you're saying it's too steep a connection between the Minor
Well,
Street
right here,
building.
Minor Street is kind of in between. So this property right here will actually bring the level of the property down. But even after bringing that down to make it level with this, it's still 5 feet above this building. There's about a 15-foot change from right there to right there on the property. It slopes one or the other.
Gotcha, okay, thank you. My other question was, do you have a fly-through of the property with the 3-building plan in addition to the one for the 2-building plan?
No, we don't have.
My last question, and I'll give up the mic, is do you have plans by a preservation architect, since Ms. Bass said that was a part of her contract, do you have plans by another preservation architect that shows what the rehabilitation costs would be, so what that assessment is, how they would take the Campbell Lane building into consideration, and what those costs are that derive the $3.6 million price tag?
Right, the costs were generated by Grail Construction. So the estimates that were given based on the recommendations by Ms. Bass, we looked at the there's 4 different structural modifications that have to be done to the building. So we picked the modification which was least disruptive to the exterior of the building. So in this building, the skin of the building was torn down to steel columns and beams. Down there, we're keeping the exterior brick, we're taking the windows out, we have to drill and put vertical reinforcing because the wind loading doesn't comply. So the procedure that was priced was the one which was going to maintain the exterior integrity of the Campbell Lane building. That's what was priced by Grail Construction. So on that cost estimate, those were, we took her recommendations and said, okay, here's for the 4 schemes, we want to price the one that is going to keep the historical exterior of the building intact as much as we can.
So that pricing was based on historic preservationist recommendation. It wasn't just a random, it was on what you shared as some of the options in terms of maintaining.
Right, and so there's just been one that's been done. Yeah, so the original consultant, Ms. Black, she did not do any recommendations on the Campbell Lane building. It was Ms. Bass.
Ms. Gallagher might be here. Oh, Dr.
you have to excavate the dirt and put it somewhere so that the building can be at the same level as the Minor Street building.
Under the building that's in there?
No,
No, leaving the old building where it is, but you know where the cafeteria building is now that's coming down? That's what's gonna lower down, we're tearing that cafeteria building down and the dirt, lowering the dirt 2.5 feet, I think it is.
Can you go to the mic and repeat that, because people online can't hear?
I see.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself to people
I'm
online?
Becky Poe, the architectural firm, LTD. So the building that's at Minor Street is not having any of the dirt removed. In fact, the trees that are in the front are gonna stay like they are, as long as there's nothing that's dead out there. And it'll be the same relationship to the street there at Minor Street as it is now. The building that's the cafeteria building is behind it, and it's, I think I'm right, Troy, 2.5 feet? Something roughly 2.5 feet higher than the Minor Street building.
Currently, there is a ramp going from Minor Street to the cafeteria building. It's still.
That was actually Ms. Gallagher that asked.
Yeah.
Everybody's looking at me, I'm like, I didn't ask that question. That was Ms. Gallagher.
Okay, I'm turning this way. Sorry. So, we take the cafeteria building, tear it down, and dig the dirt out 2.5 feet down, so that when we put the new building in its place, it will be at the same level as the Minor Street building, and they won't have to go down the ramp. Then you have the Campbell Street building, which is even lower than the Minor Street building. And,
But you're not gonna raise that.
no. So if you think of what's there now, you've got cafeteria high, Minor Street middle, Campbell Street low.
My other question, maybe a person answer this.
Okay.
So the outside space in between all of the buildings, there's a cemented space with steps. There's also, looks like there was a planter or something, maybe a gardening brick, and there's some artwork on the side.
Mhm.
Is all of that getting knocked down?
Is all the ones?
Getting knocked down.
yes.
Yes, and those masks, I call them, were done, what did we decide they were done in the 60s? You're the one that told us that. No, somebody in the neighborhood said that they were done, 80s, yeah. They're, in regard to the old building, they're fairly new.
But all of the cement, the steps, all of that.
It's got to get the dirt out.
So does that take away from the historical value of the entire location?
No.
The mass, I'm sorry, I didn't know the date of it. Someone had mentioned it, but I'd forgotten. The site work, the plaza, the way I understand it, was, and with all the connections, they were done by 59 or around then, the third building was put in. So that's considered part of the cultural landscape. So technically, when you start to take away parts of that, yes, it can impact the integrity of the site. Again, it depends on the nomination. If you make the nomination just about the Minor Street building in and of itself, with 39, the context in which it was built, there may be enough to make a nomination for that, because there are two things. It was built, and then later in the 54, I believe, Campbell Lane, and 59, the cafeteria. So collectively, it has a continuing history, but independent, the Minor Street building does have its own history. But yes, to answer your question about the site work, yeah, that impacts like a collective site history.
There you go, Mr. Shields.
We got another comment.
Okay, Mr. Davis, and then Ms. Black.
Go ahead, Gary.
Well, you're right there, then we'll just rotate the microphone.
I've got questions for both you ladies, but the first one is, when you do, and this goes back to what Mr. Sheets was asking, when we do a historic renovation, one of the things that was pointed out to me by John and I had a conversation on it, is that with the wainscoting that is inside, it was pointed out that there are like 4 different types of it. And that one of the advantages of going through the building and going back to the studs is that then we could unify it. You know, we could make it uniform. But in my opinion, part of maintaining the integrity of a historic site is that you see that transformation over time, because that Minor Street building was added onto, for instance, and to pretend like it wasn't is, to me, robbing it of a historical nature. So that's a big concern of mine, and I didn't know if your recommendation specifically addressed, Ms. Bass, addressed the wainscoting.
I recommended to keep it, for that very reason. It has lead paint on it. I recommend abating it, abating the paint, because sometimes you can attach like, the use of this building that's not approved, needs to all come out, because it's use of it by children. But the wainscoting, if anything, is sound condition.
Okay, just by cleaning it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's very helpful. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Yeah, when we spoke, when you talked about the cafeteria, that would be torn down, and then it would go 2.5 feet down further to make kind of level out with the land.
To make it so it communicates with Minor Street
Right.
without having a ramp, which is hard to connect.
Okay. Now, when Troy kind of took us around the drive, it seemed like to me that it was all level along Broad Street. And so and Troy, it may have been just my perception of it, but it seemed like that there was not any, that the new building was not sunken at all. It just seemed like it was totally flat, like you would expect a building to be, so.
Well, probably the reason for that is that these drawings are not done to be totally complete drawings. The purpose of them was as a study to see how the site works. So it was more about having them to work as a study of how things look rather than to be completely accurate. But you could go back in the corner of Paris Street and West Broad, that's where I think it's a soccer goal that's there in the corner there, and there's a hill in that corner where those bushes are, behind that fence, and you can see it drops down, or I can see it. And of course, it's not showing Broad Street completely accurate, because Broad Street has curb and gutter and 4 lanes and a turning lane and lots of cars. But it's representative of the fact that there is a highway there, and there will be a fence, and you mentioned noise, or somebody mentioned noise, so landscaping with the proper bushes can do a lot to help with the sound control. I don't know if that helps or not.
The 2 lots right there, you start out at about, that kind of lot is usually level with the roof of the building, you're going downhill. If you're going downhill, and you get down the other end, you get to the ground level with Minor Street.
This actually was superimposed on Google Earth, so it should be close. And one other comment about the interior corridors and trying to preserve the way they look. One of the things that, in addition to the lead paint, one of the things that drives this is the fact that we've got classrooms in there and other rooms that are part of the program for the Early Learning Center, and they have to be in certain locations, in certain relationships to each other. So we're trying to keep as many of the doorways as we can, and we're keeping the transom windows above as they are. I think there's, I can't remember, maybe 3 that we're keeping, but we're relocating them so they wind up over a new door. So the intent is there to make it look like it was, even if we can't keep the door where it was exactly.
size of the room will actually change?
They have to because they're not large enough to hold the classroom. There's State Department of Education requirements and probably the grant requirements, I guess, John.
Early learning.
Yeah, early learning programs.
I have a quick question about the ramp again, transporting the children between buildings. That activity room, I believe is what we're calling it. Is there any reason that we don't have an activity room in the other building so that it's not necessary to transport?
That's the, when you get to the third building, that's the only option for where to put it. No other space to put it. The other one's completely full of light.
If you look at the lower floor of the Campbell Lane building, which is the only place that kids can meet by code, there are 4 classroom spaces there, and all 4 of them are smaller than the requirements by the state. So they'll have to be expanded, and they have to be, it's better that they teach in pairs, so that you put bathroom storage, the beds, all that stuff in between 2 classrooms to make it function, so that the teachers can get to everything that they need. So we had to analyze where is the best place out of the buildings available, where's the best place to put the classrooms, and where's the best place to put those spaces. I hope that helps.
And so yes, my final comment or question is again on the, by losing the cafeteria, again, we're at site integrity again. And since that was added in 59, then is that one of the other considerations or risks that we have in keeping some part of that building or that whole site as a start? What does that do immediately when we are eliminate the cafeteria to begin with?
I think the cafeteria building is, the roof is caving in, it has, it's sat for so long, it's rained inside of it, and the inside is full of mold and water, standing water, and the old galvanized water piping, and it's just, it would cost, there would be nothing left by the time we get rid of the parts that don't work.
We don't have a cost on that restoration of that building, no? Or do we not?
Not to my knowledge.
There's no way to make the program work. There's no way to make the program for early learning work if you keep that building. It would just have to be, the site would have to be used for some other purpose.
And also, if you think about the elevations again that we talked about, that cafeteria building is up here, Minor Street's here, 2 stories down here. So if you keep the cafeteria building up there where it is, then there'd be a ramp between this one and Minor Street that goes down 2.5 feet.
And you have 8 feet from cafeteria building to the.
Right, and then that ramp that we showed you that was dropping 5 feet would drop 8 feet. Because that's the relationship that's existing between the 3 buildings now.
Just, here's, to see the stairs out of Minor Street building. That's current condition. Campbell Lane's down here, so you can kind of see the difference in the height.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Platt, and I attended West Broad School starting in 1955. So I'm very familiar with the original layout. The mass that you were speaking of, I think she was asking, that's not part of the original school. That was added, I think, when Hope Haven may have been there later. Yeah, but that's not part of the original school. And my first grade class was in the Minor Street building. My second grade class was in the cafeteria area building. And then my 6th and 7th grade classes were in the 2-story building, which is the Campbell Lane building. So I've been in all the buildings, but the masks are not part of it. Thank you.
I think you maybe want to tell us that to start with.
Yes, my name is Charlie Jones, and I'm raised in the neighborhood of Evans Street, and I attend West Broad Street School and HT Edwards Hill. And, well, she was talking about the cafeteria a while ago. Now, on the Minor Street side, there used to be a furnace there. they used to heat with coal. Now, what they gonna do with that? They gonna let it stay?
No.
I said, they were saying, the other cafeteria was deteriorating, leaking roof. Is they gonna tear out the furnace on Minor Street when you go in there?
In that little basement room?
Yeah.
Yes, that's going away.
Okay, look like they could fix the cafeteria part if they gonna take all that away.
Well, and it might be, if you look at the building itself, there are parts of it that, in addition to having the lead paint, there are parts of it that have water damage and termite damage that will also have to be repaired as we go through the construction process.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Look like the furnace part will call just as much as they gonna do the cafeteria. They can
Right.
get it.
The cafeteria building, by being 2 feet higher, it actually drains to Minor Street. So there's a large section of Minor Street, of the rim board, that is rotted out because all the water is diverted and drains directly towards Minor Street. The purpose of, when you remove Campbell Street, or the cafeteria building, it allows us to lower the grade and fix those drainage problems, and it also flattens out the play area for the children that we want to put in. So that's a big reason, in addition to the condition of the building, we're trying to fit the new structure and have ADA access to all the facilities. That's another reason why we're just looking to try to keep the Minor Street and the challenges with keeping any of the other two buildings.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I just got.
Dr. Thomas, can you remind us, like with the strollers, I know we said ages up to 3, right? How many students are in each class, and so how much are we talking about staff needing to transport students?
This is a lot,
So in an
Right,
urban.
you have to come to the microphone. I'll reprimand it.
Can't use my teacher voice.
No, ma'am, yours is not nearly as loud as mine, if I got it.
So in each of our classrooms, there are 8 children. And so our strollers are 4, and so there's 2 teachers in each classroom, and they each would push 4. Or in the case of an evacuation due to fire or emergency, we use the evacuation cribs, and that's because you don't take the extra time to strap kids into a stroller. In case of a fire, you would literally put 4 kids in an evacuation crib and push out.
And that's for K through, that's all of the classrooms that have this?
Well, yeah, for an evacuation, yes. In the case of our children, typically our kids that are under 1 are pushed by a stroller. The kids who are a little bit older are beginning to walk, so part of their gross motor, work is learning to walk, walking the halls. It would be slightly more challenging for them to be walking at an upward or downward, but as Dr. Thomas pointed out, we'll work with what we have.
And then the number of students is 8 in all classrooms,
Each of
right?
the classrooms, so like early Head Start classrooms, each classroom has 8 children, and there would be 16 classrooms.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I can't just use my teacher voice. So what is the frequency, the daily frequency that teachers would have to put the children in the strollers and wheel them to the recreational center?
So they would go to the activity room and play skates daily.
So,
So the media center would likely be once a week for each classroom.
okay. So then every day, the teachers are putting them in the stroller and going down that ramp and then coming back up that ramp to get them to the
Activity room or to
activity
the
room,
media center.
and also
or
to go to the
the
playground? So there's
Yeah,
no,
they wouldn't, depending on which classroom location, they wouldn't be pushing up or down to go to the playground based on either one of the drawings.
okay.
So the activity room and the media center would be down in the Campbell Street building as well as the Heritage room. And so there wouldn't, we were, in looking at it, they've already looked at the designs. If we cut a additional classrooms out of the Campbell Street building and put it to those specialty use utilization areas, then that would eliminate having to push up or down the ramp to get to a playground.
Okay. But every day, at least once a day,
Yeah.
they would be going from their classroom to the activity.
And lunch carts.
Yeah, Karen, how
As
about
a
food
result,
delivery? How about food delivery?
Lunch carts, but if the classrooms aren't in Campbell Street, then that would eliminate the ramp
But if they
from
are,
that. But if they were, then it would
it'd
be,
be food.
that would be 2 meals a day
The new classrooms out of Campbell Street.
for that purpose.
To not have to do food and
Yeah.
And that just eliminates the number of trips up and down.
My question goes back to the historical designation. I'm wondering in my mind, not being ignorant to kind of how this works, but is there any way that we could submit our plans to, a higher level where they could, let us know if we're on the right track or if we would be possibly approved for designation or not based on the plans we submit in advance?
Typically, what we've done in the past, such as Chase Street and Barrow and Clark Central, we've submitted after the fact. So we submit what we've renovated and what we've done to get a local historic designation. We're not submitted to be on the National Historic Register for any of our projects. If you do that, I think it's, Ms. Bass can speak to that, but it's a lot more involved process. It's gonna take a lot longer, and I think at that point in time, we're probably gonna lose the grant.
Ms. Bass, you know how long that normally takes?
Well, there's two different things. The National Register process takes a while. That's not something that you have to do. Right. You can get preliminary determinations done with the state office to determine whether or not it would be considered historically eligible. They also have an architectural review office that can look at the plans as they're underway to determine if it's something that would be consistent with something that could be nominated.
So that would be at the state level?
That's at the state level, the state preservation office, yeah, but that doesn't require a whole nomination. You actually can submit, there's an architecture, historical architect, a reviewer in the department, that they would look at the whole design and then give just like a letter, giving their determination. I've had it done in 3 days, because I've done it when we're in the process. A lot of projects I've worked on, if there's like federal funding, it's part of the Section 106 review, and so that's part of like a side branch of limited that review.
So we could do the state and national would not have to be done in advance?
Yeah, but what that does, I will say, is that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be listed, that just would give feedback, basically, on the, what the design. I'm sorry?
So, yeah, so that really raises question now, because you just mentioned 3 different schools that's designated here on a local level. So how did this particular building go from that to a national level and all this difficulty is taking place? So why can't we just be the same as, say, Cedar Shows, the 3 schools you just named? That's really raising questions to me now.
Yes, we can. I mean, that's the intent. Yeah, when we're finished with Minor Street, we would submit for the Minor Street building to be a local historic building.
So wouldn't that just eliminate a lot of this, controversy that we're having, where it's appearing that we're just trying to take away something from our African-American community? So it seems like, based around this is, we could solve this problem.
It's if you want to try to get it placed on the state or the National Historic Register, that's a lot more detailed and involved process.
What we want is for our kids in this district to have an opportunity to have an early learning center so that we can help change generations of stuff. That's what we want. And so as far as a building, I think we should start looking at this of what the school district is trying to do in our community, which is far more important. If we can do that with a local designation opposed to a national designation, I think we should really relook at how we're doing this.
that's my recommendation.
Yes.
So that's what
Yes, yes.
that's what we work towards, and that's what we presented.
Okay, now, the Campbell Street building is a two-story building. How would you use it for pre-K?
We can't put kids in the top level, so that would have to be offices or administrative or meeting space. The lower level is where we were gonna have the activity room, the media room, and, I think another meeting space, and a heritage room in that space. So we wouldn't have any classrooms, but we would have media, activity, and heritage room.
Okay, the start date of you renovating the Minor Street and the cafeteria, and will the Campbell Street hold it up?
Yes.
They will hold it up, the
Yes.
construction?
Yes, because I would have to go back, if the determination is that we're gonna keep the Campbell Street building, I would have to go back, I would have to provide a design for that building, for all the upgrades we're gonna do, and it would delay the start of the project, and it would extend the construction easily 3 to 6 months.
Wow.
We're gonna take 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up, for tonight, and then we will, bring this up briefly now, tomorrow night, with all our boards here, so.
And you had, a lot of the discussion has been about classroom size and what the state mandates for classroom sizes for these kids. And you're having to make some modifications to the Minor Street building to accommodate, I think, for a larger classroom based on what the building had historically. Can you explain what the classroom square footage size is needed and how the modifications for what you would do in the Minor Street building is different than what you would need to do for the Campbell Lane building? I'm curious because I'm wondering if the classrooms at Campbell Lane were also too small
Yes.
for what Head Start needs, and could they, like the Minor Street plan, be expanded so that they too could hold, that entire first floor could also hold classrooms? And if not, what was the reasoning behind that sort of differentiation?
Right, Minor Street is a wood frame building, so the load-bearing structure in Minor Street are the corridors. So we're able to adjust the demising walls between spaces to get our necessary space. Typically, I think we're 1,000 square feet is what we shoot for our early learning classrooms. So you have we try to have 1,000 square feet, and then there's a storage room with restrooms and hand washing sinks and things like that in between. So you try to do the rooms, you design the rooms in pairs, that way you're saving money on your plumbing rough-ins and things like that. In Campbell Street, it is a steel structure, and so you can't move the steel columns and all to accommodate increase. So we can only fit, I think it was 2 or 3 classrooms in the lower level of Campbell Street, and looking at, what we could use Campbell Street for. And then talking with Karen, as far as just functionality with the staff, having children in that building, 3 classrooms in that building, and transporting food and transporting back and forth to the other spaces was a lot more difficult. So the decision was made, we're gonna put the media center, the activity room, and the heritage room in the lower level of Campbell Street, and move the classrooms over to Minor Street.
And that actually reduces the amount of travel back and forth every day versus if we had classrooms. I think Ms. Tillman had a question, and I think that, okay, Ms. Gallagher, that's going to be it.
Okay, I want to put this out there. Where that playground where we used to, I was brought up in West Broad as well. Where the playground is there, we had in my early days, we had, the waterfront, like kind of, like a river, like the flood. So my understanding, there's like 5 different springs is in that area, is that right? is that Ben Tillman? Is that kind of, you know, the branch in that area? My understanding that there's several branches in that area, so how that gonna accommodate the school? It's in that playground area. Have y'all looked at that, or do y'all understand there's some,
Yes, there's actually a storm water line that runs through the middle of the site, which we would have to relocate because we can't set a building. And that storm line actually handles and helps drain those springs that are in that area. We've done some borings, but we'll have to do more based on our final layout to make sure we take, you know, any groundwater or anything like that into account when we're designing our foundations.
that's what I want to know.
Yeah, they could do the house by this now, because he's
Okay, so this one is about, the driveway and the parking, so it's brought up that the one-way in and one-way out would be a problem. But a lot of our schools have one-way in and one-way out, and there's a lot of congestion. But I'm thinking the Office of Urban Learning currently has cars that come up this way, which is dangerous. And the school buses are trying to get through, and people trying to get to the Cypress Center, Cypress City High, or the Boys and Girls Club. So all of the parking and driving is already a mess over here with the Office of Urban Learning. I can't imagine it being improved down there, even if there was 2 driveways. So that was just the point. But my question is, so for parking, where would staff park? And if the parking is for staff, where would parents park? And if there are events, say at night, there was community usage, how would that parking actually work with businesses on both sides of that entire development? One being a car place that always has either a tow truck or cars lined up on the street. So that's one, and then my other one was for Ms. Higginbotham. So with 16 classrooms, with 8 students in each classroom, for the age group that's served, how many of each age group would be served? I think I said that right out loud.
So she would come up and get ready to answer that last one.
Right.
And I'm asking that because that makes a difference on the usage of the strollers, which would go back to the question about the walkway.
Right, as far as the parking and the drive and the entry, we typically try to have a separate in and an out so that you separate where you have car riders and buses. Obviously, if you only have one drive that you come in and out of and you have to go through the parking area, that's not better than having a separate drive in and a separate drive out. That's not as efficient. And so if somebody goes to drop their child off, they park in that turnaround.
Like what we currently have over here. I'm just saying, like,
Right,
presenting things as if they're new or new problems. We currently have a problem.
Right. Right. So that's more efficient for somebody that's coming to drop their child off and come and go out. Paris Street is pretty much a no-go. Because like you said, if you go down that street during the day, there's vehicles on both sides. So any buses or whatever, that's not going to be a recommended access to that site. Now, with the modification to the turnaround, the roundabout, that's going to help people getting out of Minor Street on the West Broad. They can also come up the hill and come up here to the traffic light and get out as well. So the traffic's going to come more this way to get out and get to your main roads versus going back into the neighborhood.
I think the point in my head was, we haven't fixed current problems. Why are we trying to fix problems that we don't even have?
But we're
going to fix this over here.
So we're trying not to build something with the problem.
Right.
That if you have an opportunity to build, you need to try to build it the right way. And there still needs to be corrections here, but if we can build it a way that's gonna be least congested, then it's ideal to start off right rather than have to go back to that. I don't know where we're going to put those cars, and it is a nightmare, you're right. It's a nightmare. Some of this will improve when we leave, so we can make some changes once we get out, because there are a lot of staff people in this building. So we will be able to start looking at traffic flow once we're out, but I don't know exactly what that's gonna look like right now.
And there's three areas of parking down at Broad Street. You have a new lot in the center that we'll be building. There's a parking area across the way, which is a little lot that we own, which is staff parking. And then there's, I believe, 20 or so spaces that are on the street that actually minor street parking.
And this is gonna sound like I'm being cagey, and I promise I'm not. It really is dependent on the children in need of services, and so typically it'll be about a quarter of our classrooms, so in that case, about 4 of the 16 classrooms would be under the age of 1. And then depending, another quarter would be in that 1 to 1.5 range. And but it depends, there are years that we have, 3 versus 4 3-year-old, rooms that are 2.5 to 3, as opposed to kids that are, multiple kids in the 0 to 1. So it depends on the children at highest risk that are in the most need of our services. Yes, ma'am. It would be based on the children who apply and qualify, or, that are eligible for services based on poverty status.
All right, thank you all. Dr. B, that's the mic too, Dr. Porter. Thank you all for being here. We thank you. You asked some excellent questions. As always, it gives us something to think about. We thank our team for being here. Thank you, Ms. Bass, Becky Pope and her team for being here with our architects, our interpreters who are here tonight, district staff who stayed to help make this possible, our board members, but most importantly, our community members. We appreciate your interest in the property, in what we're doing, and the support that you consistently provide to Clark County Schools. So thank you, everyone. Please have a great evening. Be safe, wear your mask, stay away from COVID.